Welcome everybody to Numa. I have with me today a special guest, Louis Dorian. You are a author, a podcaster. Would you say a rave graduate or an early original OG rave before they even happened?
Yep, we were in the desert.
All right. So, and now most recently, the CEO of the Psychedelics. And I'm super excited about talking about this. You and I had a conversation last week. You're getting ready to launch and really, really excited about what you're doing and what's going on in the industry and really wanted to kind of dive in. So, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Alan. Happy to be here, man. It's
Now,
awesome.
so tell me about your experiences. Like how did you get here? One of the things that always fascinates me is we all have our story. We have a story of that all intersect and intertwined. But tell me about yours. Like, how did we get here?
Yeah, man, my story's pretty wild, and so the real book I'm trying to author is much bigger, estimating maybe 1,000 pages, probably closing in on because it's going to be a memoir and then also a social commentary and a discussion of those eight root fundamentals and within context of life and real experience. Yeah, I it all had to do with how I kind of grew up in the fact that I was searching for something. Things felt empty. I was also in a rather violent place that I was growing up in San Bernardino in what I call the informative years, the early schooling years. I witnessed my first shootings, stabbings, drug deals, and things like that in the fifth grade. And then my father and my home life was rather contradictory and strange. My father was a math professor, but I didn't find out till after he died, by actually a few years even after he died, probably 6, 7 years, that he actually had been involved with the Italian mafia in the Manhattan and New Jersey area. And he had escaped that by joining the military during the Korean War. So my father was not your average math professor. He was a very angry man. He did not have a high degree of emotional intelligence. He was abusive psychologically and verbally. He was not physically directly abusive, but he put us in some very dangerous drunk driving and road rage situations, actually. So borderline, you might consider that physical abuse. He almost drove us off a cliff one night in an angry drunken rage, things like that. So I was, experiencing some trauma at a young age, experiencing this feeling of emptiness and feeling kind of lost and also just not accepted. I was a bit of an outcast. And because of the violence, I was also involved with martial arts. And my early martial arts mentor and teacher believed in flow states, that at particular, mind, attitude, frequencies, if you will, that you could be at optimal performance. And that's not a new idea, right? We got athletes these days looking to achieve those flow states. And I think we're seeing psychedelics infiltrate into the athletic world because of that. And the Japanese actually had a very concise understanding of different states of mind that were optimal for, in their case, it was battle. It was very confrontational. But Mushin, which would be the easiest way to describe what Mushin is that flow state, attempting to achieve that connected state of optimal performance. Fudoshin, which would be easily kind of stated as convictions. Why would you not run from the battlefield? Why would you risk your life and stay? And then Haijoshin, which was really the ability to stay calm in really kind of an inconceivable level of stress. People dying and the highest levels of stress in battle. So I was immediately interested in how could I achieve that, because I was not winning fights, and so I found out. My early martial arts instructor did not share it with me directly. I was actually quite young. Most of the other students were much older than me. That he was utilizing LSD and psilocybin to supercharge meditation sessions. And so I went out by the time 1995 rolled around as a mid-level teenager, about early 17 years old. I experienced my first LSD trip. The first two trips were not profound. The third trip was earth-shattering. And then I began reading about Toltec shamanism and, started to get deeper into those ideas of kind of Mesoamerica and what they were doing. And then I decided to ingest Datura. And I did that in secret. There were a lot of people within our neighborhood that were experiencing serious harm from Datura, and most of them just trying to get high, basically. Kids trying to get high because they're broke, and Datura grows everywhere with terrible results. But I had read about kind of what these ancient and early shamans were doing with datura. And so I approached it very carefully and had extremely positive results, actually. And then I went into this heroic dosing phase of my life for about 7 years. Every month we were doing, somewhere around 750 micrograms of LSD, maybe about five paper tabs, 750 to 1,000 micrograms of LSD once a month in the desert. Those were powerful, powerful trips. Went through that period of ever increasing dosages. And then finally, my father became ill. And when he became ill, I had some subconscious motivators. Remember, this is not a time period of mentorship. This isn't a time period of facilitation. That era was a free for all, Wild West psychedelic, usage in the underground, subcultures of society, kind of a reemergence of the 60s a little bit and the 90s rave culture. And then that was dangerous. That was dangerous because people were taking psychedelics in a really kind of willy-nilly, haphazard, reckless way. I experienced some negative results as a result of that. I also experienced amazing positive experiences with LSD, but I also had some friends die as a domino effect and direct result of slipping into psychosis from improper use. So that set me up with kind of this balanced, approach that I have around psychedelics, that they aren't just miracle tools that I can just take this entheogen, whatever it is, it's going to fix me. There's a proper way to approach it, and you really want to adhere to that, because this thing can go really, really into a dark direction if you're not careful. So I'm thankful for that time period. But I do have what I would call psychedelic-induced PTSD. In 1999, in June of 99, I ingested 60 tabs of LSD, so somewhere around 10,000 micrograms of LSD in one sitting. And then on the Millennium New Year's, I ingested approximately about 25 to 28 grams of dried cubensis mushrooms and combined 30 tabs of LSD. And both those trips were pivotal on some level and had a lot to do with my father dying. I didn't understand. So it's not like I was like, man, I'm just going to push the envelope. Right. Actually, there was these subconscious motivators. It took me about 10 years to really figure out what was going on with me. My dad was dying, and I had this Faustian desire to meet death directly and like have a duel with death. And I had that immature part of my life where I was transitioning, becoming a man, kind of going through that transition, and was still in a state of feeling invincible. And so my dad was dying of cancer. I wanted to face death, and I got a chance to, and I got humbled pretty quickly. So then my father died, and I went through a very difficult period with that because our relationship was challenging. It was a lot of friction, and I began to experience extreme panic attacks, anxiety, depression, and psychedelics were not the answer for that time period, especially with the way I had approached psychedelics up to that point. So it puts me in a unique position because I was more of a psychonaut explorer, not using psychedelics for treatment at that time period of my life anyway. Because of that and all of the stigma back then and the misinformation and political agendas and things, I got to experience Western psychiatric medical, care, mental health care, and it was terrible. It was terrible. It almost resulted in my suicide. I was told I was brain damaged from the psychedelic usage, which was absolutely insane thing to say. They did that without brain scanning, of course. There was no evidence, any material evidence of real damage to my neural structure. But I was told this, and I was told I had to take these medications, that I would be on medications for life, that I would be on Paxil and, Zoloft, neuroleptics like Xanax or Ativan, Seroquel for antipsychotic intervention. I was not experiencing psychosis of any kind. So insane that they were doing this. And then one of the last pieces of advice my dad gave me in a very dark place. My dad was intellectual atheist, struggling with his own beliefs. As I said, not very low emotional intelligence quotient. Told me one day, hey, life's just hard and you have bad days and you better get used to it. So I got a bad experience with this, toughed it out, didn't take the medications. Thankfully, I think because of the LSD really intervened in that. I believe sometimes when you go far enough with psychedelics, I believe the spirit may be guiding you the entire time, that something is with you. And I believe something was with me during that time period, but I didn't understand the language. I didn't understand the messaging. And so, but I did know I didn't want to take those drugs. It didn't make sense. They told me I was an addict. That's another thing they told me, I was an addict. And but I had to take all these other drugs. And I even said that to them. I said, it doesn't make sense to me. You're telling me I'm an addict, but you want to call me full of chemicals. I'm not getting the logic here. I'm a mathematician at the time. I was working on a PhD in math, following my father's footsteps, even though that wasn't what I wanted to really do. So it didn't make sense, and I didn't take the drugs, and I'm glad. I'm very glad of that. But one day I woke up and I was, just steps away from putting a gun in my mouth. And so I met my first good Western mental health practitioner. He actually was great. He was a psychiatrist. He did not try to give me any medications or anything. He explained to me grief, he explained to me parasympathetic, sympathetic nervous system activation, and encouraged me to get back involved with martial arts. And then I did. I reached out to some folks that were in our original kind of group there, and this person was involved with Chinese energetic medicine, qigong, and I learned qigong breathing, and that's what saved my life, was the qigong. That actually changed everything, gave me these amazing tools. And what I'm not sharing with you is another part of the harm reduction concerning areas of psychedelics. That original martial arts teacher that I told you that I kind of indirectly was influenced to take psychedelics, he ended up committing suicide. He went off the rails with his own psychedelic usage, really lost control. He was an artist. He was a lot of things. He had an unfortunate incident in the, I think, British Virgin Islands, where he was smoking a joint and killed somebody in a vehicle somehow. And so things just went downhill for him. And that led to more insecurity around the psychedelic usage and everything. So there was a lot of combinations of things where it's what's led me to my 8 fundamentals. Beliefs and what you believe are so powerful and important. And at this time in my life, my beliefs weren't solidified. I wasn't sure what I believed, what was going on. I had these enormously impactful experiences, but had no framework to place them in, and no mentorship. So at that period, learning the Qigong saved my life. And then I was completely disillusioned with society. That experience with Western medical healthcare, it extended further. I lost, a lot of faith in our systems as a whole, our political systems, obviously our healthcare systems, our law enforcement systems. And I just basically intentionally got myself fired from my government job. I was working for NAVC. I took my unemployment checks and bought some cannabis and got right into the distribution market space of that prohibition era. And I lived for about 12 years as a pretty serious smuggler and distributor and production, point of contact for the cannabis industry. I was incarcerated a couple of times, was in a hostage situation in 2007 where me and the group that were almost murdered. With the intention was to kill us and rob us so they wouldn't leave any witnesses behind. And all this stuff was shaping me as I went along. And then in 2008, I met a woman that I was absolutely crazy about. I was on a date with another woman, met Nicole, and within 10 minutes knew I had to see her again. The next week, I was there chasing her without my original date. Nicole was married to a guy who was a Brazilian guy, but it was a marriage of convenience. It was a green card situation. He ended up getting in trouble for illicit substances. He was like selling MDMA or something like that. And I got my chance with her. We traveled the world for 6 years, really tumultuous and powerful romance. And then in 2014, she died tragically. So that's interesting too, because it shows the mental health space. It shows kind of something about the reality of trauma and how it affects not just maybe even the people immediately involved with the original incident. So the reason she's dead today is really because of a murder she was witness to, directly present to. Her like first love, her first boyfriend was stabbed to death in front of her in Mission Beach, San Diego. Outside of a bar, and she never got over the guilt, the trauma, the pain of that, and so she had a binge relationship with substances, and she overdosed probably somewhere between December 8th and December 10th, 2014. So that was what brought me back to psychedelics, because I then was searching for how to manage that. It was viscerally, physically more painful than my own father's death. There was something so painful about that, and I had to start figuring it out. And I surf, so the ocean's really my place. I started getting downloads in the water. I got back involved with psilocybin initially. It had been 17 years since I did LSD. I did LSD again in 2019, had an enormously impactful experience there. And it's funny, some people don't believe that there's a spirit attached with the chemical side of, like LSD, 2CB, MDMA. I can tell you that is, patently incorrect. There's absolutely a spirit there. That was the first time after all this experience you'd think I'd have this relationship. I didn't have a communicative relationship with LSD until that experience, and it spoke directly to me about the reason that my life was the way it was, the state of things, my karmic involvement with my own relationships, my father. It was enormously powerful. And then that was when I was starting to get towards understanding the 8 root fundamentals, which I developed over time. And I did that because of a martial arts mentor that I met in San Diego, a man who has had enormous impact on my ability to organize information into primary and foundational information, starting first, and then reaching out from there into more ancillary information that's not as primary. And that's how mathematics works. And we don't necessarily always approach life that way. And I think it's important that we do. Mental health is absolutely the same. There are some foundational fundamentals that are part of achieving, a healthy internal mindset, mental, emotional, and spiritual. And so I discovered that, and then I started to organically. I wasn't looking for it, but I'm in the jiu-jitsu community here, and there's a lot of veterans and stuff. And organically, people started coming to me and saying, "Hey, I'm wrestling with PTSD, I'm wrestling with depression, substance abuse, whatever it is. Like to talk to you." And I started facilitating for folks. And then, in 2021, I realized, there's a need. We really need a platform like this. There are others, but I don't think they had the same vision I have exactly. And I went all out and began creating, Psychedelist. And that's been a 4-year journey now. And Psychedelist is a from the ground up custom website built. So it's enormously expensive and difficult, but it adds a whole lot of versatility and capability that a template site would not offer. So yeah, that's where we're at. So that's the flyover. I mean, there's so much to that story. So
There is so much to that story. And I'm always amazed when I have conversations, because I like you and I talked. I don't script anything, because I just don't. One, I think it's inauthentic, and two, I do believe there is a spirit attached to this. And it is interesting because it doesn't matter if it's MDMA or TCB or LSD or psilocybin or MDMA. They channel different parts of the brain, but the spirit is still there. And I was just having a conversation today with a really close friend about microdosing LSD. And it was just kind of a random conversation where he was asking me for one thing, and I was like, "Well, bro, like, why haven't you thought about like doing?" Because I microdose LSD. Gigantic fan, creativity. It's insane what you get. But the conversation that we're having right now, as you're saying it, I'm like, "All right, well, there it is." Like, that was the conversation I was supposed to have today.
right,
So
absolutely.
freaking love it. So I do 100% believe that the spirit is inside of us, and it doesn't matter what the tool is, the medicine, breath work, it's there. It's just being able to tap into something deeper than ourselves. So
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
For me, my first was MDMA. I was sexually abused as a child. I grew a business, and in the middle of all of that, I wanted to burn my life to the ground. And I was able to get closure. I actually got to call him, and I got to forgive him. He died a couple of months ago, but it was so profound for me to be able to have that conversation. So there's so many questions I have with your father. Did you have any kind of closure? Were you able to kind of connect the dots before he died? Because I can imagine processing his cancer, his stories, and the stories that you attach yourself to with that. I imagine that had to be difficult.
Yeah, extremely difficult. It took me many, many years. No, there was not closure with his death at all. His death was very very strange and dark time. My mother and I were both in denial that he was going to die. It seemed extremely surreal. My father had waited too long to get the actual formal diagnosis. So in '99, when I took all of that LSD we talked about, he was looking extremely sick, but he had still not gone to the doctor. And at this point, he had like a grapefruit-sized tumor growing in his colon. He waited too long, and then he, my father was a tennis player. That was such an interesting guy. All the different things he had going on, because you wouldn't expect someone who was involved with the mafia to end up the way he did. And at that time, I had no idea that he was involved with the mafia. See, my dad used to say things to me, and when I was a kid, sometimes when you're a kid, and I was kind of a typical kid that had an emerging ego that thought I kind of knew it all, and because of kind of the sometimes adversarial situation I had with my father, wasn't always listening. One of my things that my dad would say to me when I had gotten involved in cannabis and psychedelics, and he definitely disapproved, is he would say to me repeatedly, all my friends are dead or in prison. And, all my friends from high school, all my friends from the school days in my old neighborhood are dead or in prison. And to me, I was like, yeah, yeah, you walked uphill both ways in the snow barefoot to school. Yeah, whatever, dad. But actually, it's a little different. Sometimes parents might exaggerate, older generations might exaggerate. But I'll tell you this right now: if anyone ever says to you, "All my friends are dead or in prison," it means something. You know what I mean? So, and I
Well,
didn't.
that's such an interesting way to look at it too, because I am very upfront with my kids. So I have an 8 and a 10-year-old, and I have a 33-year-old. And my son, my older son, because I was trying to work out my own stuff, uh, he was kind of left without a dad. Like, I was building a company and was just not capable of giving him what he needed. And he'll tell you the same thing. I think he had 32 friends that all either committed suicide or OD'd, because that's where you hang out. And now I've learned I'm 100% candid and open with my kids about what had happened to me. It's kind of hard though when you're in yours and my kind of line of work today to Google our name and to not see it all out there. So I've been very honest with my kids about the bad touching and why that's a bad thing, and telling them that I was harmed as a child. And I'm not saying that for listeners to scare my kids, but I want them to 100% know who I am. I think my dad always probably very similar to yours, because about the time period, my dad used to say to my family, "When you leave this house, you represent me." But he never told me who he was. Like, I saw it, but he never told me. I never really knew my dad. My dad was a Vietnam vet, but never really told me who he was. And now we're just now hard starting to have this conversation.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's funny. So my father's refusal to discuss his past. His past was very mysterious to me. There's only very small snippets he would give of his past. And I believe that had a lot to do with him probably just not wanting me to idolize that criminal past. And we got a lot of that out there. You got, the gangster movies and the culture there. Some of the, rap and hip hop side of things that seems to idolize a little bit of that and those things. And I think he was trying to shield me from that. And I think maybe there's more. We'll never know, because my mother knows very little about it as well. So when my father met my mother, I believe he was about 32 years old. So that's a lifetime that had been lived already. So, and typically with things like this, so my dad was born in 1930 in Manhattan. And so that's very heyday time period for the mafia in that area. And so by the time he's 11, 12 years old, that's the midpoint of World War II. Mafia is still very active there, pretty overtly active. And that would be the time that you would basically start to see young people be recruited into gangs.
Groomed, yeah, being groomed, yeah.
Yeah, so that would have been it. Now, he didn't share any of that. We have no idea. I know that what his position was, as far as what my mother understands, and that was that he was doing the numbers collections. So for those who don't know, the numbers are basically the mafia's version of the lottery, and people in neighborhoods would buy a ticket, basically buy a number, and the mafia takes a cut, and then there's a payout. And that's very serious business, and collecting that money often led to many deaths and many maimings and people really being harmed over that, because a lot of shady things went on around those collections. We'll never know what my father saw, but I know this about men, especially tough men who are in places like Vietnam and Korea and war zones and stuff like that. When people don't speak about these things, it means that some pretty serious things went on. So I'm wondering if my father wasn't present or witnessed murders or severe beatings, or who knows. But the interesting thing is that I believe that in him not being candid and really open with me about that actually led to the result he didn't want. And so, they say the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. In a way, for many years of my life, I was very deep in an underworld, a gang infested world. I wasn't necessarily a gangster myself, but I was deep in that criminal world. Along with that marijuana prohibition, I carried guns everywhere. I was in very dangerous situations. I worked with people who were very much connected to different groups, cartel groups, gang groups, organized crime groups. And so really interesting how that happened. I didn't really seek that out, but in a way, I think that maybe that would have been averted had he been very open about that. But see, in that kind of opening that up and becoming transparent with your past, I think you start to have to come to terms with your own past. You have to come to process your own past. And my father wasn't ready to do that. So, yeah.
I see that with a lot of men though, across all areas though, because we're always told what to be strong. Boys don't cry. We're supposed to be the man of the house. And I think ultimately what happens we really see this a lot is that men start to deny their emotional feelings. They start to keep everything just like way, way, way down. And I think you like crack. And that's why we see a lot of things that we see today. And all men lie. I mean, we either commit or omit. I mean,
Right.
that is the simple fact of we're gonna omit some things to protect you, but then we're just gonna flat out lie so that it makes us feel better, or as the man of the house and things are falling apart. And I remember my coach and mentor would say to me, the most powerful person in the room is one with no secrets. That guy who could walk into a room with nothing to hide is higher and can look anyone else in the eye and is automatically more powerful. And it's so true because that's kind of where we've almost traded our crown for a 9 to 5 job. We've been told to do all of these things, get in line. You can't be an entrepreneur. You got to punch a clock or just got to do all these things. I mean, from the moment that we're young, we're groomed in one way or another to follow a line.
Yep. Yep. That's what led me to psychedelics. That along with all these, components of the family environment and the, societal environments. There was at a very early age, I would say as young as 6.5, 7 years old, I was aware of a hypocrisy within our society. I
Mm.
always felt something was very off. Right from going to school, and the interesting thing with my parents, and I think maybe they did make some mistakes, but then at the same time, I don't know. It's interesting to talk about socialization of young children. Young children should have social interaction from a very early age. I didn't have that. So I actually don't have any brothers and sisters. So I was raised around older folks and never went to preschool or kindergarten. Had
Mm.
older babysitters, things like that. So my first experience with school was first grade.
Wow.
And it rubbed me the wrong way. It just seemed strange, the institutionality of it, the way that we were, yeah, just this. It felt very like fake. I can't explain it. And then later going into something that maybe people our age can really relate to is the Reagan administration just say no agenda and the DARE programs. And that was amazingly counterproductive. I think most people felt how just almost fraudulent it really was. You've got alcohol, you got tobacco. Most of us had families and people who were drinking at home. My dad was a pretty heavy drinker. And then you got DARE coming into your classroom and telling you, "Oh, kids, just say no."
This is your
These
brain.
drugs,
This is your brain on drugs.
yeah, and
Yeah.
these drugs are bad, but this drug as well, it's okay, but
Yeah.
you're too young. And it just all felt off. It all
Yeah.
felt off, and it's another reason why I did end up experimenting with psychedelics. So yeah.
So I was telling my daughter, here's a little fun fact on the word hypocrisy. So the word hypocrite actually came from the early Greeks. Because if you ever watched a play in early Greek culture, they had these beautiful, huge amphitheaters. And the word hypocrite actually means actor.
Mhm.
And when you hear the term green with envy, they actually, Greek actors would wear masks because they were so big and you would sit so high and you couldn't really hear because they didn't have sound like we do. They had acoustics. So the only thing they could do is they could see the color of the person, which they knew was good, bad, envious, all this fun stuff. I was just explaining this to my daughter last night that unfortunately the world has all of these actors that are all playing a part. And that's really kind of what we're seeing. And I was somewhere last night and I heard somebody talking about the political environment we're in. And they just went on this gigantic tirade, man. And I just kind of asked, "Do you watch the news?" And he's like, "Well, yeah, every day." I'm like, "Well, I haven't watched the news in like 10 years. I just don't. Like, there's no point in it. There's no purpose." So I'm listening to him and then I'm kind of walking him through the process that we would do in facilitation. And he was kind of looking at me. I'm like, so the story really isn't that. It's something much, much, much deeper. And you're telling yourself a past story about a future narrative that is robbing you of the present. So, and he really just kind of stopped to look at that. And it was just like, yeah, I guess. And it's like, okay. So, but we're being shaped and we're being formed by this hypocrisy kind of everywhere.
Yeah, and that leads to what my grand theory is really of what it is, what are we doing here in life? Basically, what I believe you're describing is a specific frequency, if you will, a specific thought pattern, if you want to call it a neural pathway that seems to be very contagious. Maybe you can call it that. Depends on whether you want to be more metaphysical or scientific, materialistic, scientific. But I use the term ego. Ego is a complex term because some people have I would say, a broader definition of the word ego. For me, that term has no positive aspects to it, but it's because of the specific definition of what I see ego to be. And it's exactly what you're talking about.
Mm.
This narrative of a past that's about some future that hasn't unfolded, that's robbing you of the present. That's exactly what ego does every time. It has, in my definition of ego, we can use maybe other words. Other words are difficult. The Toltecs called it self-importance, and they called it cleaning the island of the tonal. You know, you could maybe call it hubris, but hubris gives it a little different kind of take. It's not necessarily that either. So I just use the word ego, but it's important I give a disclaimer, because then you'll get some people who go, oh, no, you're wrong. You need ego to survive. You're never going to get rid of your ego. Yeah, I get that. It's just a difficult topic to talk about because the words I haven't found the exact right word for it yet. But what I believe it is an evolutionary obstacle towards our next level of potential. I don't think it's a negative necessarily. It may appear to present as negative right now, but it is, I think, essential in any species development towards becoming the stewards of their environment and then achieving technological advancement to the point of interstellar capability. And we're definitely nowhere near that yet. So this is interesting because I don't believe that we could ever see, a species from another star system, a species from another planet somewhere that would ever be parasitic, predatory, and a danger to some environment. Because in order, and it's just my theory, but in order for them to achieve that level of advancement, they would go through exponential orders of technology available to destroy themselves over and over again, pollute their world, kill themselves off, over and over again. And so they survived all that. And in order to survive all that, I think you have to come back to harmony with your environment, harmony within your species, harmony on a global scale. And we're not there right now. We're still stuck in a mindset that we believe ourselves to be superior to our other species on the planet, which I find to be odd. But we think we're superior to our other animal and plant species and life forms on the planet, purely because we have the ability, I think, to shape our environment. I don't know why we think maybe we're superior to a sperm whale. There's no way of measuring that. We have no idea. A sperm whale could emit a sound that could kill you on the spot. So that's an interesting thing. And yet, they have some sort of internet going on in their massive brains, but they don't have these implements to affect their world. So we don't know. And somehow we've asserted our dominance, but I think we're in the throes for about 10,000 years, I would say now, maybe a little more, give or take, of the era of the ego. And that obstacle for us is critical. We're either going to overcome the obstacle of what I'm calling the ego, or we're going to go through another evolutionary iteration, and maybe you and I will be, a little greener gray men in a future life, and hopefully achieving that point of stewardship of our planet. So yeah, what you're talking about for me is fundamentally, it is the eighth root fundamental of my 8 root fundamentals. It is what I call mitigation or ego management. And it's at the advanced level. I don't think you should start there. But once you get to that point and you start to realize what's causing misery, physical pain is real. Physical pain is very debilitating and awful. But you can even color physical pain with your mindset and attitude around the pain and your thoughts about that pain. So you can make it far worse, or you can make it less debilitating depending on what your focus is with it. And so, pretty much, almost all of the suffering on this planet that we're experiencing is caused as a result of this egoic mindset and never being present in this moment.
Yeah.
Yep.
And that's, I had the exact same conversation last night, and I've never heard it like that, which it makes so much sense though, because we've just evolved into something else. And as you're saying it, and I always ask this question to everyone that I have conversations with, an old Alan Watts quote: "Are you a noun or a verb?"
Right.
Because if you're a noun, that's ego. I'm a person, place, or a thing. But if you really look at who we are, we're a verb, because we're always changing. Like, we're evolving. The second that we're talking, 30 seconds has gone by, it's already gone. It's already changed. Every 7 years, our skin completely shelves itself and rebuilds, and we have all new tissue. So we're a verbing. Like, we're all verbing, but we get stuck in these loops, like what you're saying. And I hadn't even considered that. And I said this the last night to a bunch of guys I was with. There is no good or bad. There only is. Because everything else comes from a story from where? Your community, your neighbors, your church, your government, your schools, your friends. Everything else is telling you what to think or what to be. So go back 150, 200 years. What we call bad was probably good. What was good is now bad. It just changes the definition all of the time. It
Yeah.
evolves.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is, again, I've never really even considered or thought that. That's so beautiful, though, is that in order to go to an enlightened state, we really have to evolve beyond our ego, because that is the one thing that's holding us back. So, and I always joke, I named mine. I named her Sally. So even when you get up in the morning, like, you have two choices. So you can either listen to the voice that says, sleep in, stay out of bed a little longer, do this, do that, or you just knock it off and go about and you decide that you're going to do something different. And that's kind of the decision I made for myself. Like naming that part and being able to say, all right, I know where it's coming from now. And a lot of people, I think, are afraid to do.
Yeah. Identification is also difficult. That's why I say this ego mitigation, ego management part is very difficult. In the Toltec kind of ideas around this, these were people who were transitioning from old shamanism and what the Mayans and Aztecs and older civilizations were doing prior to the Toltecs experiencing the conquistadors. So as the conquistadors came in, they experienced a major humbling moment, and these what then became what they called the New Age shamans or New Age sorcerers, in a way, were managing reality from a different perspective, because the older ones who were engaging in like datura and ceremonies around carving people's hearts out of their chests and eating them and stuff, they were focused on power, and they believed themselves to be extremely powerful, and found out quickly when the conquistadors arrived that they were nowhere near as powerful as they thought. That was the emergence of this new age idea that really the problem was the ego, and they didn't call it ego, they called it self-importance, but they realized that that was the challenge, was freedom. It wasn't power, it's how do I become free. It's funny you said looping thoughts, these looping thoughts. And if you notice on LSD, and especially at higher dosages, when things go off the rails for people, they start to slip into psychosis or slip into more challenging experiences, that it's the looping thoughts, and they will go through these loops over and over and over again. Those loops are the ego's manifestation at that point, and they're not letting go. And I've noticed time and time again, what happens is, instead of going through the reset of shutting down, turning off the language-based portion of the mind, and going into that full neural reset that, you know, psychedelics like LSD make available to us, they fight it and they stay in the language-based scripting in their minds. And that's a dangerous place to be, actually, once you've added psychedelic to your experience. So yeah, that's, you know, it's huge in understanding what we're going through as human beings. And, you know, you talked about some of the trauma you went through and things like that. And it's also begins to implicate our kind of perspective on criminal justice in a way, right? So a lot of people in the idea of what is justice think really on some level that's kind of a tit for tat. You do this, you should be put in prison. You do this, maybe you should even be put to death. You do this, whatever. And then by that way of thinking, the jail and prison systems are acceptable, that there's sexual abuse and physical abuse within them, because if you're there, you basically deserve that. That's completely incorrect from my perspective of what I've achieved now. And of course, you know, Gandhi saying, you know, an eye for an eye, you know, leaves us all blind. Well, what does he mean by that? What I, you know, because it seems real simple. It's a great saying, but what does he actually mean? I think what he means is that actually what real justice is not a tit for tat. Real justice doesn't necessarily result in someone needing to be imprisoned or needing whatever it is. What justice really is for the perpetrator, the transgressor, to finally arrive at the full awareness and understanding of the harm they caused. That realization is actually what justice is. The problem is how do you achieve, when do you reach that point? And you'll know when you reach it. You can see when somebody achieves it, and then they understand the responsibility that they hold. I watched this series, a very interesting series called I Am a Killer. I think it's a Netflix series, but I watch it because I watch these people and I look for what's in them, what their awareness is. All of those people have murdered somebody. All of them are facing incarceration at different levels, some of them life, and very few of them have actually achieved that awareness. But you'll know it when they have. It's very obvious for me. I can point them out to you and say, this person's done it. The rest of them are all just trying to achieve parole or achieve some sort of clemency, leniency in their sentencing, but they haven't achieved the full understanding, the responsibility of what harm and what impact that they cause. And in order to actually reach a point where we're more effective at that, we have to have that mindset, not that it's retribution, revenge, or some sort of balancing of the equation through, harming this person to the degree that they harm someone else. And that is all because I believe that what we're doing here is we're climbing the mountains of awareness. So the universe in my model is attempting to become aware of itself. In fact, I see it as an opposite end of the polar spectrum of singularity. So if the Big Bang's real, if the theory is accurate, then the Big Bang is the first point of singularity. Its opposite polar will be a point in which the universe achieves total and uniformity, self-awareness, awareness to itself. And at that point, there will be a complete cessation of all suffering in the universe entirely. And that's the purpose of suffering. Suffering is the cattle prod that pushes you towards furthering awareness and pushes you away from ego, pushes you more into the present and being connected at that level. So that's that's what I see there. But it's going to be a long ways before we can get others to see it that way, I think.
I agree. It's as you're talking about that, I'm thinking about my first experience. So I relived it and revisited 3 times. So I actually was in the room the third time. He was actually on the bed crying and telling me that it was being done to him. So that actually is what allowed me to reframe and to move from anger and move into forgiveness. So when I was driving down the road, I heard a voice say, "You know what you need to do for closure? You need to call him." I'm like, "There was no way that's happening," but I did. But I picked up the phone and I called. I found him after 48 years, and it was a family member that had been kind of kicked out of the family. And the very, very first thing that he said was, "Well, it happened to me," and I'm like, "I know, you told me already in my experience." And then the mood just changed. It like completely, because at that time it was okay. Maybe you understand. And then I just said, I don't want anything from you. I don't want any trouble. I'm not telling anyone who you are. I just want you to know that I'm going to be okay. That's it. That's all I want. So when he died in October, November, that was the first thing I thought, which is so ironic because I was not at all like, I never had any feelings of revenge or good. You got what was coming for you. My only fear was, did you get to close the did you get to confront your abuser and to be able to forgive them as well? And I wonder if we were to go back and look at all the adolescents today that are drug addicts or homeless or all these things in prison now, if we were to go back to their trauma and look at it differently, just as you're saying, would the outcome be different? I imagine it would.
Yeah. Yeah.
So very interesting. It took a long time because no one's ever trained me to think like that. And it really was psychedelics for me that allowed me to reframe kind of that thought process. But tell me what you're doing now, because this is like really super exciting. You've been on this incredible journey, and then you decided you wanted to just build something because you saw a need. So tell me about that. Like, where are we with this now?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I saw a need. I wanted to do something new. I had been in that, as I said, in that prohibition space for so long, and then, of course, we're seeing that legalization turn. So that also put pressure on me to figure out what's next. And then I have other things going on. I got a rental business that I'm fighting a civil rights lawsuit action against, and going on for 7 years. So they were taking my income away from me there, and I'm not passionate about rentals, not passionate about product procurement either anymore. And psychedelics always was enormously impactful and something so, it's like the inward version of exploring the cosmos, being an astronaut of some sort. So I always had it, that interest, and then seeing the impact it had for others. And then that was like why I started this thing. And now where we're at, it was an evolving thing. It started with, let's make treatment providers available to people, professionals who have experience with psychedelics and have some sort of metric. I don't fully agree with what's going on. For instance, like the OHA, Oregon Health Association, has outlined whatever the guidelines are for, facilitator training. In those guidelines, I don't believe and I don't know if legally they can't do it, but they aren't required to have their own psilocybin experience. That's madness. I don't see how you can facilitate someone else truly effectively if you don't have that experience. Like, for instance, in facilitating for veterans, I am a veteran myself, not of a formal war the way they are, but a veteran in the drug war. And I've certainly experienced the dangers there and have had friends die in it. So, because of that, I'm able to speak to veterans and they have a certain amount of respect for me. They can tell that I've been through it, that I have experienced PTSD as well. And so they're willing to speak to me. When a
Mm.
veteran from the VA puts them in front of some therapist that's never seen a day of combat, and they're supposed to be there guiding them through it, those veterans don't respect those people.
No,
That's the other reason.
I'm a veteran as well, and I know that when I started facilitating, I have a really good friend who is in Canada, who said, if you're going to do this, you have to try all of them, because you have to know what each of them do and what their response is, so that as you're treating, you kind of have an idea. So I agree, it's crazy that you would never. And I know a lot of people, even in the ketamine space. If you ask them if they've ever done it, no, I'm afraid. I'm like, well, then how on earth
You're doing.
are you going to be able to treat someone if you're not even willing to do it yourself?
Yeah, and so that's part of what we're doing. That was one of the visions is, look, we need to have a standard. We're not even there yet because we just don't have the staffing, but we're going to have staffing as we build revenue, go and visit retreat centers, meet with facilitators, talk about what our standard is. We just can't allow people who don't have psychedelic experience themselves to engage with facilitation. Hey, if you want to be there with someone else who has the experience and want to be a part of this, support in some way, but to be the lead on a psychedelic facilitation experience when you've never had a truly powerful psychedelic experience yourself, yeah, I can't get behind that. So that, and then also I think what's emerging is becoming important as we see really kind of crappy stories come out of some areas, like Tulum, Mexico, some bad stories. Even right in LA and different places, there's stories of sexual abuse. I just talked to someone who apparently in a facilitation session, they lost control of someone. And so they hogtied them and threw them in a cupboard or in a closet. Yeah, mind blowing. How is this even
So this
happening?
is the third time I've heard that this year. Something similar.
Yeah, madness. What is going on? So there needs to be some oversight, I think, with, for instance, anything where it's a one-on-one session. There really shouldn't be one-on-one sessions. There should always be a chaperone, I think, some way of having a buffer towards any type of impropriety taking place. Definitely concerned when we're talking about, females with a male facilitator. I don't want to say that all, male facilitators should have, suspicion shined upon them just for the fact that they're men, but we just need to have certain things in place to mitigate the problems that come out of that. And that's one of the things that we would like to do with psychedelics, to try and just reduce the harm where we can. It's inevitable that there's going to be negative things that happen, and so we just want to do our best to reduce them where we can. The product space, same thing. Product harm reduction is far easier. Honestly, it's easy. It's just lab testing. We just need to make sure that we're testing products, vetting them, and making sure the standards are being upheld. And we've learned some lessons from the cannabis industry. A lot of lab result fudging, lab result corruption has been going on there. And so we want to step in the middle and be the conduit between the laboratory and the merchant, so that they can't just pay the lab off to kind of do their bidding. I mean, it's not foolproof. Of course, there's ways they could still do that. But we're going to be the middleman for offering the promotional package to the merchant provider. Then we pay the lab. The merchant sends the products to the laboratory. We post the lab results. We're also going to do a secret shopper level, which I think then really does help to mitigate some of that. So the merchant won't know when the product's being purchased through sort of a faceless John Doe representative of the laboratory, and then the testing's done, say, quarterly, something like that. So harm reduction being affected there. We're at, we got our lab testing resource section that's going to be part of that integration, but also offering, at-home test kits for just the presence of, say, fentanyl or something that could be a very serious concern. And then we've got our legal advice section. We really want to get more attorneys on there. It's been a difficult kind of nut to crack there. I've got one attorney up. It hasn't been up that long, but some attorneys have been reticent. We're just trying to interact with more communities, and I've got some leads from people saying, hey, I know some attorneys might be willing. And so the attorney side is very important for all types of guidance: criminal guidance, civil guidance, business building guidance, if you're building a psychedelic, involved business on some level. So that's there, and then we're going to be embedding a Discord so people can have open discussions around their experiences, things like that. An event section so we can keep up to date on the symposiums, conferences, and trade shows that are coming up. And then finally, our crowning piece will be the business to business, marketing model. That'll be the only part of the site that is completely hidden behind a paywall. For visitors that just want to view what business to business options are out there, it'll be a small nominal fee, 10, $15 a month, something like that. Won't be a lot. But if you're a business offering, ancillary support services like high risk payment processing, child safety packaging options, brand development options, web development options, POS systems, all that, there's, they're going to have an opportunity to market there. And that'll also help really tie the whole community together. Because it'll also be interacting with the back-end admin portals for every single one of the listers on the site. So they'll then have access to the B2B directly without having to pay because they're already paying us to be on there. And then that's going to pull everyone together where they can interact, and then they'll have the Discord. So we're really trying to create this fully interconnected kind of, cyber city, really. And so, that's where we're at. That's where the vision evolved to that. It didn't quite start that.
That's incredible because I mean you use the word I hear the word ecosystem thrown around a lot, but I mean it really is like it's an entire community behind the scenes.
Yes, absolutely.
So
And that's
so when do we launch? When do we go? Like this is amazing.
so launching is it's been phased approach. So we are live. We're live. We've got our treatment site up. We've got our product site up. We've got our attorneys up. We've only got one attorney. We got our lab testing resource section up. As far as fully launching the full vision, we're probably 3 to 4 months out. I hope not 4. It's a heavy financial burden for me because revenue's not there yet. We're getting around now to try and saying to our current listers, hey, we need you guys to start contributing. We need, we're not asking for huge amounts. Our price ranges, we do have premium ad account listing potentials, and then we also have basics. The range of costs on that is anywhere from $35 a month up to maximum is $500 a month. Really not asking a lot of money. And so we're just trying to get those. We've got about a little over 500 businesses on there right now. Our goal by, hopefully the end of this year would be to double that number to get to 1,000. We're really underserved in places like the Midwest and lots of places in Europe and Asia that are underserved. And we get calls all the time on the business line from people who are suffering from different issues, treatment, resistant depression, substance abuse issues, stuff like that. And they're like, hey, I can't find a facilitator in my area. I can't find someone to work with. So we're really trying to build those numbers up and get that revenue in there. So we are live, but full vision is probably 90 days out, maybe a little longer. Yeah.
Incredible.
Yeah.
I know I looked at it the other day, so we're gonna put ours out there as well. So, and I know, I mean, it is a challenge, especially working with labs. And I think when we talked, it was fascinating how you already had secret shoppers, if you will, that were already out there and testing and making sure that everything was good. Which we're hearing a lot of things in the media, like we're really bad mushroom gummies that may not have things that we think are going to be in there, that something completely different. So safety is so important, especially for those who are, again, I don't advocate doing it on their own, but I feel like we're seeing a lot of that. I feel like we're seeing a lot of these individual experimenters, if you will, or seekers who are trying to do this all on their own, which is a little irresponsible, as you were saying in the very, very beginning of the conversation. If you're not going into it with intention, it's just a joyride at that point. So, and I do feel like, and it's a ride. Yeah, and I feel like there's this misinformation that the trip itself is what's going to heal you, and it's not the trip. That's like 10% of it. So it's the 90% of the what are you going to do with the lessons that you learned, good, bad. Again, we already said like there really isn't. There is no such thing. Terror, absolutely, but you can learn from everything. So what can you do with those? So I love that you're doing that. And I love that your focus is so much on the creation of a safe city because of the way that you grew up.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And those experimenters, those seekers, I mean, you have to understand some reasons why they're doing it are economic. That these folks can't afford. We don't have mainstream, healthcare insurance providers offering support here, payment in this direction. We have, unfortunately, where some of the harm is happening is even in baby boomer generation, and then even some of the older people who have struggled with their own mental health, struggled with pain, management. Many of them have been addicted to opioids and don't want to be. And they can't afford $2,500 or $1,500 or whatever it is to do a facilitated session with someone, and they're struggling with that. And then they turn around and they get scammed, and that leads a whole nother discussion about what we're seeing with Meta and what we're seeing with big tech, allowing the scammers to run pretty rampant, and yet censoring the psychedelic and holistic health community. It's really a travesty what they're doing, and in fact, we're about to launch almost an anti-Meta campaign here soon. They're just they're just supporting it at such an egregious level that it's mind blowing. We launched a group called Psychedelic Scam Buster. It had to do with weeding out scams that were scamming folks with psychedelic products, and Meta stepped in and said we were encouraging recreational drug use and levied all these sanctions against our admins. Huge problems there. Meanwhile, the scams are out there offering, all their products, and we're seeing things. I want to be careful who I out. I haven't seen the lab testing resources, but some major big names out there were offering vape pens that supposedly have psilocybin in them. The test results came back with arsenic, basically an arsenic pen.
Wow.
There's some really some really crappy things going on out there. I didn't see the lab test results. That's why I'm reticent to say their name. They're a very big provider in the mushroom space, just put it that way. And I'm going to dig deeper before I release any info, because I want to be conscious and responsible with information and not just go wherever the wind blows. So we're going to look into that further. But yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot. We need the community to come together, and we need people to be willing to pay us. We can't do this without revenue. So, that's where we're at right now. We're working with Courtney Starhart with Church of the Natural Law and Finding the Forest podcast as well. She's helping put together some podcasts and some campaigns to target some of our own already present listeners to say, hey, please, we need you guys to start pulling a little bit of weight here. We can't do it for free any longer. We just don't have the resources. And it's absolutely necessary to have the infrastructure to do the type of things we want to do to make the space safer. So we got to kind of circle the wagons, as Courtney likes to say, is what we're trying to do now.
Which I think makes sense, because we really are a tight-knit community. And I think we ultimately all want the same thing. So we all want safety. We all want efficacy. So yeah, I love that. Circle the wagons.
Yeah.
So with that, I think what I would love to do is be able to put more information in the show notes of how we can find and how we can contribute to the industry and how to make it safer.
So as far as Psychedelist, right? Psychedelist.com, which you're very aware of, obviously. We've also got our socials. The socials are very tenuous, right? It's hard to say how long they'll be up. We've had to shift accounts several times. So on Instagram, we're _psychedelist_. I'm assuming you're going to put this in print mode. So guys, it's a play on words, guys. If you're listening out there, we're a directory list, advertising list. So it's LIST at the end, not psychedelics. And also, I didn't mention this earlier, but the brand idea is that one day people will call themselves psychedelists, right? So, an analogous side of life, a physicist, a violinist, a dentist, someone who's dedicated a long determined hours to develop a skill. And that's what we believe around the mental health space is, including psychedelics, but even beyond, just in mental health in general. So that's the word, guys. So _psychedelist. You'll find us on X. You'll find us on Instagram. On Facebook, it's psychedelist.com with a slash at the end. That's because they deleted one of our accounts already. And we don't even know how long that, because we're going to full on attack Meta. I don't care. I'm not going to back away from them. What they're doing is really egregious. And those are the main socials right now. We're checking out Blue Sky. We're going to get a bigger presence on Substack. We've got an email, hello@psychedelist.com. And we've got a business line. It's 619-800-0447. And guys, if you do use the number, really usually send a text message, but you can also leave a voicemail. There's so much spam and scamming calls these days that you just can't answer them. So we wait to see if someone's serious enough to leave a message, and we'll definitely get back to you. So. Yeah.
Love it. And I'll make sure we put all these in the show notes as well, and have everyone follow. I follow you on all of them anyway. So if they want to get to you, they can just get to you through me. But we will absolutely do that as well. Anything else? I mean, we covered so much stuff today, and and I feel like we've got to do this again, because I really want to get more into kind of where we are with the harm reduction. So I just watched the Matthew Perry documentary Tuesday, and it was appalling. From being in the healthcare space where I was for 30 years, moving into this space, seeing what we allowed to happen is just a travesty. So I love what you're doing.
Yeah, we need to talk about that, Alan. Let's do another one because I want to talk about what I see with why Purdue Pharma was so effective in creating a cataclysmic event, and I believe that there's a lot of facets there, and it also is intertwined with what we saw with Matthew Perry.
100%. And I was thinking that actually when you were talking earlier and we used the word drug, it's always such a fascinating term to me. And I was just talking about this yesterday because most of the time we think about a drug and it either is going to help us heal or it's going to help us escape. And I think most of the things that we have today, they're really just band-aids on problems. They're really not helping anything. And as you were saying that, I mean, yeah, the whole Purdue thing was we definitely got to do that. We got to
We
have
got to do that
another.
because I got a whole different
Yes,
perspective on quote unquote drugs in general.
yes.
I have a
And
whole
I was on the healthcare insurance space for 30 years, so I know the games that were played there. The transparency is unbelievable. But
Mhm.
Lewis, thank you so much for your time today. Uh, Everyone, this is Alan Wiederhold, founder of Numa. This is Numa, the crossroad of science and enlightenment. Follow us on social. You know where to find us on YouTube, on X, Instagram, and Facebook for now. I have no idea, as Lewis says, how long we're going to be there.
Yeah.
We seem to be okay for TikTok right now. But again, thank you for your time. And this is Numa.
Thanks, Alan.